idea. When this idea was presented to you, what was your initial reaction, and why did you want to do your interpretation of this, both in terms of writing the script and then directing?
Well, I was certainly not looking for a movie like this. I think we had just finished a series together. Volker was with us on that series doing the music, and I felt like I wanted to make an English language movie, and I had developed a few, and I'd done a bunch of films in Germany, and I thought, okay, it's about time I make my English language debut film. And then Malte called and said, what would you think of if I got the rights to All Quiet on the Western Front? Would you be interested? And I thought inside, damn, I can't get out of this one. For some reason it struck a chord. I'd read it when I was maybe 15, then again when I was 22 or so, and it just stayed with me. And it's just an example is also I went home then, and I always have doubts if I should make this next film or another film. And I went home and discussed it with my family, and my daughter was at the table, and my son was at it. They both got up and thought, oh, I'm not interested in what he's going to do next. And then they immediately, but then I mentioned the title, and my daughter sort of turned around and said, that book, I just read it in school. It's the best book I've ever read. I cried many times, and you absolutely have to do it. And so it's sort of, and I remember having that feeling when I was 17, and it just sort of always stays with you, and then you can't say no,
How was adapting it then? How was that process for you in terms of, did you have a really clear idea of how you wanted it to look visually? And also just, I feel there's such space in this film as well, as much as the intensity's there. What did you see in your head when you were writing the script? Was it very visual when you were writing it?
Yeah, first of all, the movie has very little dialogue. I took all of the dialogue. Whenever I write, I'm not very good at dialogue writing. So, or at reading even. I read it and I'm like, why are they saying all this stuff? We could just shoot it, and so I cross out stuff, and when I write it, that's not good enough. It could just be silent, and so the movie ends up as it is, with a lot of images, and then we get to sit down and get to plan it. But the one thing I think that sort of was our North Star when writing it, but also when we sat down together to do the storyboards, and do the shot list, we're meticulous, anal OCD planners, I think. Yeah, we really want to know. I want to know when I go into a film what I'm going to do, otherwise I'm going to be too scared on the day, that everything goes wrong, and then everyone looks at me, what do we do next? And I go, I don't know. So I want to have a plan, and then the actors usually come and we talk together, and then everything changes anyway, but still you have a plan already. So developing that plan, it came mostly from there's a certain tone to the book, which is very sort of one-eyed perspective on Paul. It just looks at this kid being thrown into this war, going through it, and gives you a very visceral, physical experience of his life in these 4 years, but also is slightly distant, slightly sort of like, because Remarque was a reporter. And he just kind of looks at it and describes it to you without being overbearing, without telling you what to feel, without just sort of putting out the facts as a reporter, like a journalist. And you have to interpret it for yourself. And we wanted to translate that into the film with what we were doing, with what Volker was doing, what the editing was doing, and so forth. To basically witness and stay with this character at every single moment. And it's also why we decided for one camera, and just to get to your visual question, one camera is concentrated on Paul's face, or it sees what he's seeing. So that was our sort of singular perspective, single camera approach, and being very, and trying to translate what was in the book, being very subjective, but also being taking the camera always like 10 inches back to slightly describe it more, I'm always afraid, especially as a German filmmaker, to over manipulate an audience and think, I'm gonna emotionalize something and sentimentalize something, especially a war film. I wanted to create a certain distance and kind of say like, here, this is it, and you be the judge of it.
Just before I move on to talk to you, James, about further, we've got, I think, the rest of our wonderful panel who are joining us. We got Leslie Patterson there, please. Leslie, co-writer of the book, the screenplay. Hello, Leslie. We've got Malte Gruner, the producer. Hello, Malte, how are you? Thank you for being here. And then do we have Frank? Is Frank Cruz here? Hello, Frank, who's the sound designer. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I'm going to stand here actually so I can see everyone's faces because it's so rude. Following on from what you were saying, those meetings then in terms of the film visually and the two of you sitting down and working out what that would be. Talk to me a little bit about that collaboration, James.
Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, it was it was a remarkable process, quite a unique process because through all the sort of horrors of COVID and everything, all the just the destruction of it all, it gave Ed and I an opportunity where Malta put me up in a hotel room in Berlin, and I think I was the only guest in the hotel. So I sort of had the presidential suite, which was lovely. And Ed would come and visit me every morning at sort of 8 a.m. and we would work through to about sort of 8, 9 p.m. and we would forensically go through the script. And it enabled us to just to completely. We realised that even though this is a huge scale film, and we had production were fantastic in servicing us, but we knew that we wanted it to be as lean as humanly possible and have no kind of no fat to trim. So we wanted to put everything on the screen. So we shortlisted and storyboarded pretty much every sequence of the film, and because of the way Ed and I's sort of brains work, we think in edits. We don't think in just sort of a whole setup. So how would we want the scene to start and how do we want it to finish, and then kind of fill in the gaps from there. And obviously Sven, who's an incredible editor in his own right, took our work and completely enhanced it. But yeah, I think it was about a 6-week process, 6 to 8 week process, wasn't it? Something like that. Yeah, and it was it also gave us an opportunity to sort of sit back from the script and say, well, what do we really require here? And at this point, we didn't even have some principal locations, so we were kind of, we're both very spatial people. We get inspired by spaces as well as performers. So, how do you set a frame or set a shot when you don't know what the space is going to look like? It's almost impossible, because even throughout infinite amount of dialogue between you, but us both, we're still most certainly thinking two completely different images, even though our tastes are very similar. So yeah, that was refreshing and amazing, and it's sort of embedded in my work process so much now that I actually can't think how to make another movie without doing that. So I really took that away, and thank you for that.
Without me, you mean?
We'll talk to Malte in a second about those locations and about kind of that whole journey. But just quickly before we move on, the preparation for some of those shots, whether, and there's kind of the two extremes and everything in the middle in the film. You have these really intimate moments, then you have these incredible long shots that take us on a journey. We're in and out trenches and all that kind of stuff. What is the preparation for that, in terms of going into actually rolling on some of those scenes?
You know what's wonderful? So when we were in this hotel room, sometimes I put James down on the floor and said, lie there, and then shot it with my iPhone, and he did the same to me. And so as we storyboarded this, and we came up with these incredibly complicated shots. And while we came up with them, at some point I always thought like he knew how to do them. And so I was going, okay, this is the way. And somebody turned to him and said, but how the hell are we going to shoot it? And he said, I don't know. So, it's really liberating to not think of the technical limitations, to just think, what does the story need? And let's come up with it. And then he said something wonderful. He said, we just asked the grips and the operator to help us, figure this out. And you have a wonderful crew, like here, of collaborators that sort of comes together and say, all right, we've got this problem, we've got this shot, we're running through the trench, we want to climb out, we're going to run across the battlefield all in one take. How do we do it? Everyone looks at you. The grips don't know either. You know, the operator doesn't know either. But they didn't then go off to the research. James does the research. We test different things, and eventually we figure it out together. And so that's a really liberating process to just think in terms of story. What does the story need? And then have the technical aspect second.
Can we just pass the mic down to Malta, please, if that's okay? Just hello.
Hello.
How are you? Congratulations.
Very well, thank you. And apologies for the delay.
You took this idea to Edward. You brought it to him. Why Edward? What was it about his vision, his storytelling, that you felt that this was the right project for him to work on?
I had known Edward. We hadn't worked together, but I had known him socially and as a friend, sort of for many years. And we were actually in development for a project that we then put aside. So we were in regular contact on something that we've now picked up again. And so I knew him, and I sort of followed his work from his fantastic German films, Jack, or Deutschland '83, to The Terror, and then obviously Patrick Melrose, and so you've just seen this. He's an incredible filmmaker. So it really wasn't a question, obviously.
For you as a producer with this, in terms of the script that you came up with along with Leslie, is that idea of where do you start as a producer? What were the biggest challenges for you? The locations, the casting, all that kind of things is your role. For you, what was the biggest challenge that you faced with this film, would you say?
Yeah, it was just a very complex undertaking on many levels. It's obviously, Leslie's and Ian's script sort of came to me at the time that they were still trying to sort of set it up as an English language film, and I spoke to Edward about it, and then sort of we went back to them and sort of and said, can you please give it to us, and we'll we'll do it as a German language film, but we think this is worthwhile doing. Yeah. And then I had never done a war film on that scale. I'd done a much smaller film called Land of Mine, which is all set on a beach, basically. So I had no clue. But again, it's then about the collaborators and talking to production designer early, talking to our fantastic costume designer Lizzie Crystal early, talking to Heike Merker, our head of makeup, early, and just sort of putting all these pieces together and realizing what do they need in order to do this well. And then you're an aggregator of all this knowledge that you don't have.
Leslie, for you, what was the kind of draw to retelling this story?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's an incredible masterpiece. How can you not love the novel? But obviously being a Scottish lassie and not German, the appeal was definitely the themes in the novel. That betrayal of a youthful generation, regardless of which country you're from, I think resonates deeply. And not only that, I think we live today in such a polarized culture that to tell it from the other side, quote unquote, is also a wonderful thing. So, I mean, what an incredible honor to have Malta and Edward come along to want to do that. It's just a dream come true.
Was there a favourite sequence for you when writing the script, and then kind of on the flip of that, did that change when you saw the film?
I've probably got two favourite scenes. The opening sequence following the uniform back. I remember coming up with that. I was actually out on a run because my previous career was as a professional triathlete. So I was out on a run in the Highlands in Scotland, very inspirational. And I just actually watched Schindler's List, and I loved the red coat sequence in that. And we really thought about how we want to start in the battlefield as the real hook. because it's such a wonderful, strange cinematic world, trench warfare. But how do we then get back to show the patriotic fervour of Paul? So thematically, just a sense that the uniform is worth more than the man spoke volumes. And then to see how all of these guys translated that, the music, the composition, I mean, it was incredible. I cried when I watched it for the first time. And then my second scene, most favourite one, is with Duval, the Frenchman, in the shell hole. And I think purely because it's so uncomfortable. You can't wait for it to be over. And that's the point of it. And how they sort of managed to captivate. You want to be in it, but you want to be out of it, is just amazing.
Thank you. Before we talk about editing and sound design and score, casting, I mean, finding your Paul, before we get onto Paul, Albrecht, what a beautiful performance. It's absolutely just such a gorgeous. For you, what jumped out at you with the script when you read it for the first time? What was your reaction?
Thank you, first of all, and hello.
Sorry, everyone.
My first reaction, I think it was, I love the silence of cut, and I have to ask Edward a question. I think, I love the character, and then this question, is he going to make a adventurous war movie out of this? Because there are so many wonderful movies and also movies about war that, and I think sometimes by accident, turned into an adventurous war movie because the camera work was amazing and everything. All the departments did their best, but it somehow feels like, I want to do this. Let's go to the trenches. Looks like fun, and the music. Oh, okay, yeah. And there are heroes. Great, there are heroes. I want to feel like that. And I thought, I don't want to do a movie like that. Don't want to see cut, depict like that. So we met at one of my favorite cafes in Berlin, next to a graveyard. I like silence. I don't know.
Dark.
There's
nice.
so much noise and so much distraction.
History
from
there, I like it.
anything. So I always try to find at least once a day a place where I really can listen to the people, to myself, whatever. And we met there, and he even was constantly listening to my fear, my question of fear, with so much, I don't know, curiosity. And then answering in such a, just the tone. It was not the content. The content is the tone and his look that convinced me that we should tell this story together.
Cat's death.
But by the way, that's a big point about. That's also I can very much. We immediately identified with the same thing, and with Malte, that we cannot make a film about heroes. Especially if it's a German film, it cannot be a film. It must be a film about humans that kind of anyway. They can't be heroes, and they can't look heroic. And everyone sometimes, when I'm in America or here, or even in England, they're like, "Couldn't you have let Paul survive?" And there are two reasons for that. First of all, he can't because he dies in the book, and secondly, I don't think in a German war movie, a soldier can survive. They're doomed, and the whole it's doomed for destruction. And so I think we connected on that level, that we said, let's make the same movie together. And this group, you always need the same voice. You always need to want to make the same movie.
So there's no alternative version. But talk about finding Felix and casting him as Paul. Because it's a beautiful story tinged with sadness, as well, with the story of your casting director, if you don't mind.
Yes, absolutely. So we had a wonderful friend and casting director, Simone Bär, who we cast the movie with, and I'm really, as I said before, I'm really diligent. I want to see everyone and so forth. But Paul. Felix, the actor who plays Paul Bäumer, was actually an idea that came from Malte's wife, because she worked in the theater. She had got him a job in this theater in Vienna, And she showed me, she sent me the picture, said, you should meet this guy. And I immediately thought, oh, he looks really interesting. So Simone and I and Malte auditioned, and we flew him in to Berlin, and because he has such a, wonderful, transparent, old-fashioned, vulnerable face. He doesn't look like a hero. Again, he looks like a studious guy from high school. He's not a broad-shouldered, broad-jawed kind of hunk. Like he has just interesting, different looking, different behaviors, more like a dancer than a soldier. And then, so he shows up, and I cast him, and to be honest, I loved him. I loved all his appearance and his manner, but he'd never been in front of a camera before, never. It's only theater. And so it's like 25-year-old guy, 24-year-old guy. And so he'd never acted with the camera. And he had his mannerisms or insecurities, and I had my insecurities, and he didn't look like a soldier, and I was insecure about it. And then I shared these feelings with Malte and Simone, and she, in a wonderful way, she just stayed calm and said, yeah, but he's just very special, let's invite him again. Why don't we put some boots? And I said, yeah, but he's more like a dancer, is he really a soldier? And then she said, just put some boots on him. And I realized, yeah, that's a good idea, because when I wear hiking boots, I walk definitely differently than from gym shoots. And so we put some boots, a uniform. He immediately changed. And then he also had these little things that I thought that might be difficult for a movie, and I was afraid of telling him, because I thought if I end up working with him and I tell him, he might take this as criticism and then always be self-conscious about it. So Simone said, I'll tell him. I said, oh, great. So she told him, and Felix was so, he wanted to learn.
Yeah.
He wanted to suck up this knowledge, to inhale this knowledge, and he was so grateful to her. He said, oh, thank you for telling me. And then she showed him on a video, see, you do this, don't do that. It's not good. He said, yeah, I won't. And he never ever did it again, And so he was so willing to learn. And then, sadly, Simone died a couple of weeks ago, just 2 days before her BAFTA nomination, of cancer. And but she was that type of person who discovered new people. I'm sure she had a lot to do with Albrecht's rise to acting and to movies. And yeah, we remember her very, very fondly.
Wow. Do you think that lack of experience in front of a camera helped with the performance that you got from him in terms of specifically for that character? Because it's almost like he's not even aware that it's there, sort of thing. The genuine performance and kind of depth of the character just comes through in a way.
I think that's just his soul, He's just a really honest, beautiful person, really eager to work. And he is, interestingly, the innocence, he's also an actor, the only actor that we really saw, and this requires a certain age. He was 24 when we shot the movie, so really young. But still, the character's 18 in the book. And I cast a lot of 18-year-old kids too, and I realized that but they can't play it. They don't have the depth yet to play an enthusiastic kid who goes, yes, let's do this, to a jaded, aged before his age, dead inside, soulless eyes, young man. That's the art Felix plays. You need a little bit of life experience. You need to have moved out, have had a girlfriend or boyfriend leave you, disappoint, broken heart, failed studies, whatever. You need that kind of bump in the road to be able to play that and to have that tiny bit of experience in your eyes. And Felix had that. And he had an innocence, yes, with the camera, and yet he was wonderfully aware. For example, there's a shot in the beginning in the school when we meet all his friends. And I didn't want to edit this. We didn't want to edit it. We said it has to be one shot because it's a group. If we cut it up, everyone needs a close-up. It's a lot of cuts suddenly. It's not, let's shoot this in one. And I was nervous about how to do it. So I, in a sort of meeting room, in a conference room in a hotel, I took out the tables and rehearsed with these 5 kids. And I had my iPhone. I think you were on the camera test that day. And I filmed them, and I did this dolly shot, handheld dolly shot with Felix, led over to the group, and I end up in this over shoulder behind him to see all the, and Felix I was holding my iPhone, and Felix just sort of steps to the right and steps right in front of my lens. Yeah, and I don't see the guys anymore. So I'm basically here, and I want to see the guy. And so he was that unaware of the camera. But then the wonderful thing is, you just tell him. You know, in that case, I dared to tell him. I said, like, Felix, so just be careful. I'm here with the camera. Just, you know, if you take a step to your left, I can see the others. And he's like, oh yeah. And suddenly he learned this. From 1 second to the next, he knew, I gotta play with the camera. It's part of the group.
Yeah.
And it never happened. From then on, he became this dancer with his colleagues, with the camera. He was aware of it without catering to it, without playing to it, without being vain. Because there are a lot of people who have, a lot of actors who have a face here and a face there. both sides, like they always find the camera turning towards it. And Felix is just sort of wonderfully ignoring it, but loving it too.
Sven, can we talk about editing, please? Because, you know, the meticulous nature of the way that Edward works, but for you in that, you know, day one of editing, or when does day one begin, or is it as the film is being made, is it prior to that? What's the prep up to that first day of working on the edit of the film?
Okay, day one already started on the second shooting day
Yeah.
probably, because I got the footage every day from the day before. But the preparation already started 1 year before the principal photography. By the time Edward and me, we worked on a mood trailer which should express the tonality of the film. And it was just to get a feeling for it. And instead of cutting together images of war, we used images of beautiful nature and underscored it with a decreasing, destructive score. And we immediately loved the tension that was created by this combination of violence and beauty, and we wanted to keep that in the movie. And somehow we didn't know how yet, but we knew that we wanted to have these images. And so James, I think it was before the shooting that you went into the forests of Czech Republic and shot tons of great footage of these beautiful landscapes and nature. And then it turned out that the film is more intense than we expected. And we used these images sometimes after extremely intense war scenes to create distance, to pull out the audience sometimes, because we felt that the scenes are unbearable and we need to create some rest and grounding. And so we found a place for these images, and I'm sort of proud how we implemented these, because they haven't been in the script before. Another interesting aspect is that, as Edward said before, we had many scenes without dialogue, and cutting scenes with dialogue is much more easier, because it gives you sort of a time frame and a structure, and the scene length is defined by the dialogue. But we had so many scenes without dialogue, so we had to do a lot of sound work already in the stage of editing to make it as close to the final mix as possible, to make sure that the timing is right, because sound influences the dynamics, structure, and length of scenes that much.
So that involved a collaboration with Frank,
Yes.
with regards to. Can we pass the mic down to Frank, if that's okay? Hi, Frank.
Hi.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about the kind of the prep going into this, and that journey as well. You know, of bringing in that nature element to heighten so much of the story, really, and what that meant for you as a sound designer.
Yeah, I mean, the prep was the most obvious thing that came to mind, was obviously finding out if there were any recordings from that time, like genuinely actual recording from the Western Front, like, because I mean, wax cylinders were already invented, so I looked for authentic recordings, but I essentially didn't find. I think there aren't any. There's one which is claimed to be authentic, but later on I read some expertise. The scientists found that it's probably it was staged in an actual film or a music studio, so they recreated it after the fact. But it's you know, that's all. It's not proven entirely, so that even that recording is questionable for its authenticity. And there are a bunch of recordings of what they did. They had a technology called sound ranging, where they tried to locate mortar positions by finding the delays of them coming in, recorded on film. And there were some modern reconstructions of those sounds. There's actually a film strip of November 11 o'clock. I think it's here in the Imperial War Museum,
Yeah.
and they reconstructed it. So you did that, but everything's made with modern sounds. So pretty much quickly abandoned that thread, and I stumbled across an article in a pretty niche German history, you can say, magazine that mentioned, like, it was specifically about the sound, the subjective sound of World War I, and it was based on letters that soldiers wrote back home, and a lot of them were poets, writers, like Remarque himself. So they were very kind of, how do you say, they created images and sound while you were reading it, because they described the sounds in a onomatopoeia way.
Yeah.
Can you say that? Yeah. Like
Well
in a
done.
comic book, basically.
Yeah.
So that was super inspiring, and what I learned from that process was really that it's not really about finding a scientific accuracy in that field, because if a grenade detonates next to you, it's probably, there's a scientific correct sound for that, but it's always like how you feel, what's going on in the shock and everything. So we quickly decided to, we're going to go this entirely from the emotional side of things and create what needs to be done to enhance the drama, and landed on this concept of having a very high contrast, for obvious reasons, because the film was cut like that, but also to create these shell shock moments that are based on, I would always say, even though it sounds like a euphemism, but I think it's the things we tried were rather simplistic in their approach, like to use leave stuff out and boil it down to really clean and clear, untreated breathing and the stuff to emphasize the point of view of Paul all the time, because the film, even though there's only one straight true POV shot of Paul under the gas mask.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's always exterior point of view, camera-wise. But we want to find a way to tell this, a way to shift in and out of the observer's point of view and first-person point of view of Paul. So that was a goal we tried to go after.
And that relationship with Volker, if we could pass the mic up to Volker, that'd be great. Wow, I mean, that kind of, I still, dun, 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 it's just, it's so powerful. I kind of have it in my head. It's not what you expect for a kind of a sort of a theme within this film, but there is so much to that. The drums, the beautiful strings that come in, and it's very simplistic. It's not kind of overboarded with score, but where it's there, it counts and it matters and it hits you, and it's so powerful. What were the conversations about what was required of you as a composer for this film that you had with Edward?
Well, I mean, when you hear these three notes, normally when you do an experiment like that, and you send that to a director, he maybe asks or says, "It's a great sound, but can you compose something with it?" In this case, it was different because, first of all, Edward and me, we had a very brief conversation after my first screening with him, and there were a few descriptions that he gave me. Well, one was, I want to have music for Paul Palmer's stomach. One was, I want to have snares played by someone who can't play snares. I want to have destruction, and I want to have something from you that you've never done before. So these were the four things that I took home on a train ride from Berlin to Düsseldorf. And while I was doing that, I was thinking that I need an instrument from that time, and I need specifically a short motive, because when I want to play something significant in a war movie, there is not much place for music. A lot of times when you do too long arrangements, they are buried in explosions. So let's say you have a melody of 4 or 5 bars. Every second bar you hear like boom, and then you lose maybe one note, and suddenly the whole melody is not there anymore. And that also means a lot of pressure in the mix, because you have always to decide, do we want to take his work or do we want to take his work? And so what I felt was, I want to find something that is very small but significant, and if that is something that is done with an instrument from that time, but at the same time that I can treat like a modular synth, then that would be ideal. So when I came home, I didn't find that harmonium that I was playing that with, but I had in my studio a harmonium of my grandmother that I refurbished. And I don't know if you've seen ever a harmonium from the inside, but there is a kind of tar, like a black thing that actually creates the air stream, and when you press the pedals, the air is going through that thing, and it creates a lot of inside noises while you're playing it. Even when you press the keys or you pull the registers out, it makes a lot of noise. So I put a lot of microphones inside the harmonium, which you normally in a recording process don't do. You actually try to get all the noise away. So I actually amplified that, and I played these 3 notes through a distortion and an amplifier, and I added all these layers on top of each other with the mechanical noises as a machine, because the first scene that was very impressive for me, which you don't find in a lot of films, is a little bit like an art film. That is the beginning for me, because it has these pictures next to each other that in a way explain exactly what you normally do in a long storytelling. This was just done in 10 minutes, but it was so nicely done, with the sewing machines taking over the rhythm. And when you hear these sewing machines, and then you straight away think, I don't need a hi-hat or anything that is driving, because they are already the drive in the rhythm. And so I recorded all that. And normally you don't, as a composer, you are afraid, I would say, to send things too early, because when you send one piece out and it is a 50% chance that it's accepted, that means for you a lot of long days of depression if it's if it's not accepted. So normally you work for a week or 2 weeks, and you have a whole folder of cues that you send. But in this case, I had the feeling I need an opinion of Edward, because if I want to continue with this kind of statement, and he's willing to go with these 3 notes as an element, we can make that work. And his straight reaction was, I really love it. And there was quite directly a support for me for that idea. And if you notice, this motive is mainly going through all cues. Even in the trumpet of the military trumpet player, we had the same motive as an element, just to keep constant continuity. What is it? Yeah. Exactly.
But working with the kind of the beautiful relationship between sound and when Volker is created. A little bit about that kind of journey. Like you mentioned the sewing machines, and then the snare comes in not long after that, doesn't it? It kind of sort of bolts you in a way. And that kind of relationship and working together on finding that synergy and finding, where those lines cross, where they meet. Do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, I gave them each other's phone numbers, and then they were able to talk. No, I mean, it's really about, I think Volker also, very smartly, he said, like, I'm going to make this music with there's going to be Frank, who needs to do very loud sound effects. So how do I cut through the noise? And I think that's also part of your approach to say, okay, you don't want to shine over that, but how do you express what Paul? One of the tasks is, what does Paul might feel in his stomach?
Mm-hmm.
If you can't hear it because there's constant barrage of gunfire, then we don't know what he feels. So these harsh Led Zeppelin type sounds cut through the noise, and sort of give you the feeling, and that way. And I think that I remember, and Volker also came to the mix, and then I remember our first mix, for example, the music was too low, because when you work on, you work on like a minute, and then you try to get the sound effects right, and then you say, yeah, okay, we set this music at this level, and you don't hear it in context, and then you hear it for the first time in a run through, and Volker was there for that, and I was sort of ashamed because I'd sort of mixed this music too low there. I remember him sort of in the background getting a bit antsy and thinking, oh, this is, and so we immediately knew we don't get to feel what Paul feels in his stomach if we mix it this way. So we just sort of adjusted the levels, and I think they talked a lot also, in certain scenes of, let's say, the tanks are coming, there needs to be barrage of gunfire, but there also needs to be that music, that stomping war machine that keeps going and just relentlessly, mercilessly eviscerating and driving over people, that over human flesh that put themselves in their way. And Volker had the task of creating music for that, and so I think there needs to be a constant dialogue between those two. Also frequency sometimes cancels each other out, so they have to coordinate the frequency. But what's really interesting also, what Sven said earlier about rhythm in editing is so influenced by sound design, and so you have to, you can hold a shot, we hold shots like for 30 seconds on a wide shot of nature, you could say after 4 seconds, well, I've seen it, it hasn't changed, still some trees, but the sound sort of helps you, and especially the contrast of sound, of having noise and cutting, and so suddenly you just go and silence, and you just sort of let yourself go and immerse yourself into the shot and sort of relax for a minute and enjoy that poetry or that melancholy. I think it's just really important for that rhythm. And that was just a big task, I think, of the process of imagining it in the edit, and then knowing when does music help us over this, or what is Frank gonna do to help us to help subtly shift the atmosphere while you hold a shot for 40 seconds that doesn't really change.
I could talk to you for hours about this film, and it's such a treat to have so many of your wonderful team here and hear you all talk about it. And thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for just looking at this one shot as well.
What's a real treat to be here and show this movie, and it's such an honor, and that you stayed through this entire conversation. We're immensely thankful for you.
Please hands together for a wonderful cast and crew. Congratulations. Thank you so much. Thank you. Safe home, everybody, and have a great weekend. Thank you.